The scream wasn't from the crowd. It was from the steel. A low, grinding shriek that vibrated through Maya Rodriguez's cheap stadium seat, cutting through the thundering bass of Julian Vance's latest hit. Most of the 60,000 fans at the Providence Civic Center were lost in the intoxicating rhythm, their hands raised, eyes fixed on the iconic rock star silhouetted against a dazzling light show. But Maya, a two-year-old student nurse perpetually operating on heightened alert, heard it, felt it. Her eyes snapped to the colossal lighting rig suspended precariously above the stage. A faint tremor rippled through the structure, almost imperceptible amidst the pyrotechnics and stage fog. But Maya's instincts, honed by countless hours in simulated emergencies and real-life clinical rotations, screamed danger. This wasn't a show effect. This was a structural failure. Julian Vance, or Jules as the world knew him, was in his element. Leather jacket, ripped jeans, guitar slung low, his voice a gravelly roar that commanded the arena. He was a god on stage, oblivious to the metal fatigue beginning to tear apart the scaffolding directly above his head. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stadium's bass. People around her were swaying, singing along, blissfully unaware of the catastrophe unfolding silently above them. Then, a sudden, violent shudder. A shower of sparks erupted from a connection point. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, quickly drowned out by a deafening crack as one of the main support beams buckled. The entire lighting rig, a monstrous lattice of metal, cables, and blinding lamps, began to tilt, slowly at first, then picking up terrifying speed as gravity asserted its dominion. Chaos erupted. A wave of terrified screams swept through the stadium. Security guards, trained for crowd control, stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. But for Maya, there was no hesitation, only instinct. The image of a human being in imminent peril burned into her mind from every emergency room rotation, obliterated all other thoughts. "Move!" she yelled, though her voice was lost in the din. She launched herself out of her seat, vaulting over the flimsy barrier separating her section from the stage access. Adrenaline surged, burning away the aches from a double shift and a late-night study session. She was a blur of motion, weaving through the stampeding crowd, her eyes locked on Jules. He was still standing, guitar forgotten, looking up with a dazed expression as tons of metal began its descent. She reached the stage edge, leaping onto the platform. A heavy power cable snaked across her path. She cleared it with a desperate jump. Jules, momentarily paralyzed by the unfolding disaster, finally looked towards her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Get down!" Maya screamed, throwing every ounce of her remaining strength into the command. She tackled him, a full-body impact that drove the air from his lungs. She shoved him forward, away from the direct impact zone, simultaneously twisting her own body to shield his head and neck with her arms and back as the monstrous rig crashed down. The world exploded in a symphony of destruction. A guttural roar of grinding metal, the shattering of glass, the crackle of severed power lines, and the collective shriek of the terror-stricken crowd. Sparks rained down like lethal confetti, acrid smoke filled her nostrils, and the searing heat of arcing electricity singed the hair on her arms. A heavy chunk of debris slammed into her left shoulder, sending a shockwave of white-hot agony through her entire side. She heard Jules groan beneath her, felt the tremor of his body as the world became a cacophony of destruction. Then, mercifully, everything went black. The first sensation was a dull ache, throbbing deep in her skull. Then came the smell of burnt plastic and ozone, sharp and metallic. A kaleidoscope of disorienting flashes, emergency lights, camera flashes, the pulsing red and blue of police and ambulance sirens. A cacophony of shouting voices, frantic whispers, and the distant mournful wail of a child. Maya's eyes fluttered open. She was lying on the stage amidst twisted metal and shattered equipment. Her left shoulder throbbed with an insistent, sickening pain. Her head spun, her stomach churned. Concussion, dislocated shoulder. Great, she thought, a grim humor in the face of chaos. But her own injuries were secondary. Her training, an ingrained imperative, took over. "Jules?" she croaked, her voice hoarse. She tried to push herself up, wincing as her dislocated shoulder screamed in protest. She had to assess him. Airway, breathing, circulation, neurological status. Julian Vance was stirring beneath her. His eyes, initially unfocused, slowly cleared. He looked at her, then around at the devastation, a bewildered expression on his famous face. What happened?" Rig collapse, Maya muttered, her focus absolute. She gently felt along his neck, checking for tenderness, abnormalities. Can you feel your fingers? Your toes? He nodded, still dazed. Yeah, my head hurts though. Can you track my finger with your eyes? She held up 2 fingers, moving them slowly from side to side. He followed them, but his right pupil seemed slightly more dilated than his left. Unequal pupils. Possible head trauma. C-spine precaution paramount. Sirens screamed closer. A flurry of movement. Paramedics, firemen, and police officers swarmed the stage. All right, move back. Clear the scene, a gruff voice boomed. 2 burly paramedics in neon vests approached, their faces grim. They looked at Jules, then at Maya, who was still kneeling over him. All right, get back, ma'am. Let us do our job. Maya looked up, her expression fierce despite the pain. Wait, don't move him yet. I think he might have a C-spine injury. His pupils are unequal. The paramedic, a stocky man with a worn expression, scoffed. All right, kid, we got it. We're professionals. Move. He reached for Jules's arm. No, really. I'm a student nurse. I saw the collapse. I shielded him. His right pupil is blown a little wider. You need to stabilize his neck before you move him, or you could do permanent damage. Maya's voice was firm, despite the tremor in her hands. A police officer, Officer Miller, a man with a perpetually disapproving frown, stepped forward. Hey, you're interfering with emergency personnel. That's a felony. Get out of the way before I arrest you. I'm trying to prevent further injury, Maya argued, her frustration mounting. Her shoulder throbbed, her head pounded, and she felt like she was fighting a losing battle against bureaucracy and ignorance. He needs a neck brace, a backboard. Right now, he's vulnerable. Listen, sweetheart, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a crime scene and an emergency. You're not a doctor, kid. You're a liability. Get out of the way before you get sued. Officer Miller's words were laced with dismissive contempt, a tone Maya had become all too familiar with in her clinical rotations when navigating skeptical patients or overworked staff. Jules, clearer-headed now, looked between Maya and the officer. She's right, he mumbled. She saved me. She knows what she's doing. The lead paramedic hesitated, looking at Jules's face, then at Maya's determined one. There was a desperate earnestness in her eyes that transcended mere civilian interference. He quickly shined his penlight into Jules's eyes, his brow furrowed. She was right. The right pupil was indeed slightly sluggish, marginally wider. All right, hold up, the paramedic barked, waving off his partner. Get the collar and backboard. Don't touch him until it's secured. He looked at Maya, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. You all right, kid? You look like you got hit by a bus. Maya finally allowed herself to slump slightly. Dislocated shoulder, I think? And a concussion. Officer Miller, however, was not appeased. She's still interfering, and she needs to give a statement. He grabbed Maya's arm, not gently. Let's go, hero. You're coming with me. Maya winced from the pain in her shoulder, her adrenaline starting to crash. She was a hero 1 minute, a potential suspect the next. It was a jarring shift, a frustrating introduction to the world's indifference to good intentions. She was escorted off the stage, feeling like a criminal, leaving the still-dazed rock star in the competent hands of the paramedics, a crucial battle won, but at what cost to herself? The lights, once a source of spectacle, now only illuminated the wreckage, and her own profound sense of exhaustion and injustice. The next morning, Maya woke in her cramped studio apartment, the stale scent of burnt coffee and cheap ramen hanging in the air. Every muscle screamed in protest. Her left arm was a leaden weight, immobilized in a sling she'd fashioned from a ripped t-shirt. Her head throbbed with a persistent, dull ache, and the world seemed to tilt whenever she moved too quickly. A hot, angry bruise blossomed on her ribs where the debris had struck. She hadn't gone to the ER. She knew the drill, the long waits, the dismissive questions from overworked staff. Besides, she had no insurance. She'd self-assessed, splinted, and hoped for the best, a familiar routine for a nursing student perpetually on the brink of financial disaster. She reached for her phone, intending to check her clinical schedule. Instead, she found a digital explosion. Missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, texts from classmates she hadn't spoken to in months, and a dizzying cascade of social media notifications. Her Instagram feed, usually a sparse collection of textbook photos and stressed-out selfies, was flooded with a blurry, shaky video. The video, shot by a fan in the upper decks, showed it all. The stage collapse. her desperate dash, the moment she shielded Jules, the raw, terrifying impact. It was short, grainy, but undeniable. The accompanying caption read, "Unsung hero saves Jules Vance." She scrolled through the comments, a mix of awe and disbelief. Who is that girl? Oh my god, she literally ran into falling metal. A real-life angel? A tentative warmth spread through her chest, a fragile balm against the lingering ache of her injuries and Officer Miller's contempt. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel the recognition, the praise. Then, the news channel started calling. The phone rang incessantly. News vans began to park on her street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like predatory antennae. Maya felt a fresh wave of panic. She craved anonymity, not celebrity. She had exams, clinicals, a precarious financial tightrope to walk. This was not part of the plan. Just as she was contemplating burying her phone under a pile of textbooks, a news alert flashed across her screen. Julian Vance to make first public statement since stage collapse. The live stream began instantly. Julian Vance, pale and subdued, sat in a hospital bed, a small bandage on his forehead. Next to him, a stern-faced woman with an expensive suit and an air of tightly controlled fury, his longtime manager, Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was whispering urgently in Jules's ear, her gestures agitated, but Jules pushed her hand away. He looked directly into the camera, his famous eyes uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Last night, I almost died," he began, his voice raspy. "And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for one person, a young woman who, without a second thought, ran into danger to protect me." He recounted the terrifying seconds, his voice thick with emotion. "She put her life on the line. She saved me from crushing injury, possibly even death. And then, injured herself, she still made sure I was safe until the paramedics arrived." He paused, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I've lived a life of excess, of superficiality. This changed me. It gave me a second chance, and I want to dedicate that chance, and everything that comes with it, to the person who gave it to me." Evelyn Reed's face, captured in a split-second shot, was a mask of barely suppressed horror. Jules continued, his voice strengthening. "My upcoming Second Chance World Tour was meant to benefit a generic charity. But now it will have a single beneficiary. All profits, every dime, every cent, will go to Maya Rodriguez." The estimated figures, flashed across the bottom of the screen, were astronomical. $50 million, possibly as high as $80 million. The world collectively gasped. Maya, watching in stunned silence, dropped her phone. The hot, fleeting warmth of recognition was replaced by a cold dread. This wasn't just attention. This was a life-altering, terrifying burden. The world, it seemed, agreed. Maya's life didn't just change, it imploded. The initial wave of hero worship was swiftly eclipsed by something far more sinister. The news vans multiplied. Tabloids shrieked her name, but the narrative quickly began to twist. Her first taste of the brewing storm came not from the media, but from the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of Dean Albright, the formidable head of her nursing college. Dean Albright, a man whose meticulously combed gray hair and pressed suit exuded an aura of impeccable, unyielding protocol, offered no congratulations, no words of praise. His thin lips were drawn into a tight, disapproving line. "Miss Rodriguez," he began, his voice devoid of warmth, "what exactly were you thinking?" Maya, still nursing her injuries, sat stiffly in the chair, her sling a stark reminder of her actions. "Thinking, Dean? I was thinking a man was about to die." "You acted without a license, Miss Rodriguez," he countered, tapping a manicured finger on a stack of incident reports. "You performed medical procedures, however rudimentary, outside of a clinical setting. You exposed this university to immense legal liability. The headlines are unfortunate." He gestured vaguely towards a newspaper featuring a sensationalist headline about the million-dollar nurse. "I assessed his C-spine, Dean. I stabilized him. I literally kept him from being moved improperly, which could have paralyzed him. The paramedics corroborated it." Dean Albright leaned back, his gaze chillingly dispassionate. "That is irrelevant to the institution, Miss Rodriguez. Our reputation, our accreditation, hinges on our students adhering to the highest standards of professional conduct within established protocols. Your actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, were reckless. You are a student, not a licensed practitioner. You overstepped." "Overstepped?" Maya's voice rose slightly, her frustration boiling. So, saving a life is overstepping? Exposing the university to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit by practicing medicine without a license is most certainly overstepping, he retorted, his voice rising in chilling finality. Effective immediately, Miss Rodriguez. You are suspended from all clinical rotations, pending a full investigation by the Academic Review Board. Your status as a student will be evaluated. I suggest you retain legal counsel. Maya stared at him, aghast. Her dream, her entire future, was being threatened not by her failures, but by her very heroism. The words hit her like a physical blow. Suspended. Her tuition, her loans, her precarious hold on a future free of poverty, all jeopardized by a bureaucratic decree. It felt monstrously unfair, a gut-wrenching betrayal. The professional condemnation was just the beginning. The media, fueled by anonymous sources and a hunger for scandal, began to dissect Maya's life with surgical precision. Evelyn Reed, Jules's manager, swiftly activated her damage control machine, twisting the narrative to protect her client's image and, more importantly, her control over his vast fortune. Anonymous sources close to the Vance camp leaked stories to tabloids and gossip blogs, painting Maya as an obsessed fan, a calculated opportunist. Was the heroic rescue a setup? One particularly nasty headline blared. Another. Broke nursing student targets. Rock star for fortune. They questioned her humble background, her student debt, her desperate need for money, framing her as a predatory gold digger. Her social media, once a quiet space, became a cesspool of vitriol. Comments ranged from outright threats to accusations of manipulation. She probably knew the rig was going to fall, waiting for her chance. Just another groupie looking for a payout. $80 million? She bought a lottery ticket with Jules's life. Then came the pièce de résistance of the smear campaign. Crystal Thorne, Jules's recently dumped ex-girlfriend, a minor social media influencer with a penchant for manufactured drama and a massive following, appeared in an exclusive, tearful interview. She sat, perfectly lit, a picture of fragile concern. I'm just worried about Jules, Crystal whimpered, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. He's so vulnerable right now, so generous. This girl. She just seems to have appeared out of nowhere, taking advantage of his kindness in his moment of weakness. She spoke in veiled insinuations, suggesting a manipulative, romantic connection, subtly implying Maya had exploited Jules's trauma. Crystal's fans, legion and fiercely loyal, instantly turned into an angry mob, swarming Maya's online presence with accusations and hateful memes. Maya felt like she was drowning. Each new accusation, each fresh insult, was a physical blow. The world, it seemed, wasn't interested in a hero. It wanted a villain, or at least a scandal. And she, the broke student nurse who had merely tried to save a life, was being cast in the leading role. Maya became a prisoner in her own home. The windows were perpetually drawn, the blinds angled just so to avoid catching a glimpse of the ever-present news vans parked on her street. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar number on her caller ID sent a jolt of anxiety through her. The once comforting glow of her phone now felt like a portal to a hostile world. Her social media feeds, once a source of mundane connection, had morphed into an open forum for public dissection. She couldn't escape the accusations, the insults, the horrifying threats. The narrative had hardened. She was an opportunist, a schemer, a gold digger who had manipulated a vulnerable rock star. Her humble background, once a testament to her resilience, was now twisted into evidence of her desperate avarice. The student loans that kept her awake at night became proof of her desperation. The part-time job at the campus bookstore, her lifeline, informed her she was terminated due to the media circus creating a disruptive environment. Even some of her closest friends and family, once supportive, began to waver under the relentless scrutiny. Her cousin, usually her staunchest ally, called, her voice hesitant. Maya, are you really sure you didn't, know something about the stage? Or that you weren't trying to get his attention before? The questions, laced with doubt, stung more than any anonymous insult. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Then came the legal threats. A thick, official-looking envelope arrived, emblazoned with the logo of a prestigious law firm representing Julian Vance's record label. It was a cease and desist letter, a chillingly formal document accusing her of misrepresenting her relationship with Mr. Vance, and demanding she publicly refuse the tour money to protect his reputation. The letter was clearly a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate her, a baseless legal maneuver, but it was terrifying nonetheless. The language, cold and unforgiving, painted her as a malicious actor, not a savior. Evelyn Reed, Maya realized, was turning the screws, tightening the vise until Maya cracked. Her physical injuries, too, were a constant, nagging reminder of her ordeal. The dislocated shoulder still ached, and her concussion left her perpetually foggy and prone to dizzy spells. She needed proper medical care, but the thought of facing another skeptical doctor filled her with dread. She finally mustered the courage to visit a local urgent care clinic, hoping for anonymity. It was a mistake. The young resident physician who examined her, Dr. Chen, recognized her instantly. His initial professional demeanor quickly shifted to one of thinly veiled suspicion. He listened to her symptoms with a dismissive air, his eyes darting to her sling, then to her face, then back to his tablet, avoiding eye contact. "So," Dr. Chen finally said, setting down her chart with a pointed thud, "you're the one." His voice dripped with condescension. "You know, Miss Rodriguez, a lot of us spend a decade in school, sacrificing sleep and social lives to do what you pretended to do on that stage. We earn our stripes, we follow protocols, we don't endanger ourselves or others for a photo op." He tapped his pen against her chart. "I'll document your injuries, of course. A concussion, a minor dislocation, but I'd be very careful about what you claim, and who you tell your story to. People tend to embellish for, shall we say, personal gain." He implied, with shocking bluntness, that she was exaggerating or faking her symptoms for a future lawsuit, a cynical ploy to maximize her payout. The professional insult cut deeper than any physical pain. It felt like a betrayal from within her own chosen profession. She left the clinic feeling dirtier than when she'd arrived. The lowest point came with a crisp, official email from Dean Albright. The subject line read, "Academic Review Board Decision, Miss Maya Rodriguez." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The board had voted. They found her in violation of multiple clauses of the Student Code of Conduct, citing unprofessional conduct, practicing medicine without a license, and bringing disrepute to the institution. Her permanent expulsion was being recommended. The final decision rested with him. The email contained a stark invitation, a final meeting with Dean Albright to discuss the terms of her separation from the university. Her dream, her hard-fought path out of poverty, was dead. Crushed not by a collapsing stage, but by the cold, bureaucratic machine that had deemed her heroism a liability. The weight of it all was crushing, suffocating. The relentless antagonism, the legal threats, the public humiliation, the betrayal from her own institution, the dismissal from the doctor. She couldn't fight anymore. She was exhausted, emotionally ravaged, and utterly broken. What was the point? The money, the fame, it wasn't worth this. It was destroying her. She found the crumpled business card Jules's security detail had pressed into her hand at the hospital. A direct line to him, they'd said, in case she needed anything. She stared at it, her finger hovering over the numbers. She would call, she decided. She would tell him she couldn't accept the money. She would issue a public statement refusing the funds, just like Evelyn's lawyers demanded. She would try to disappear, to salvage whatever was left of her life, even if it meant abandoning her dreams. She dialed, her heart pounding. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. Julian Vance's office, a voice answered, smooth and impossibly poised. It was Evelyn Reed. Maya froze. I was trying to reach Julian. Evelyn's voice was sickly sweet, dripping with feigned concern. "Oh dear. Julian is very busy, as you can imagine. But I can certainly pass on a message. Let me guess, you've finally come to your senses, haven't you?" There was a triumphant, knowing lilt in her tone. "The press, the legal fees, the public scrutiny. It's all rather overwhelming for someone not accustomed to this life, isn't it?" I can't take the money," Maya whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I want to issue a statement. I want to refuse it. Just make it all stop." Evelyn's smile was audible. "Excellent, dear. An exceedingly wise decision. We'll send over the paperwork, a simple declaration. Just sign it, and we can all put this unfortunate business behind us. Julian is impressionable. He means well, but he needs protection. From people like you." The final words, delivered with chilling, patronizing sweetness, were the breaking point. "From people like me?" Maya repeated, her voice suddenly devoid of fear. Evelyn saw her as a parasite, a manipulative opportunist. She, Maya Rodriguez, who had risked her life for a stranger, who had clung to her morals while the world tried to strip them away. The condescension, the absolute certainty of Evelyn's contempt, was the final, devastating insult. A slow, burning rage began to simmer in Maya's gut, eclipsing the exhaustion, the fear, the crushing despair. She was not a parasite. She was not impressionable. And she refused to let these people, these vultures, steal her integrity along with her future. Without another word, Maya slammed the phone down. The decision was made. She wouldn't surrender. She would fight. Julian Vance had been living in a carefully constructed bubble. Evelyn Reed, his manager, controlled his media access, his phone, his public appearances. She fed him curated news, reassuring him that everything was under control regarding Maya Rodriguez. She portrayed Maya as an overwhelmed civilian, simply needing to be managed away from the spotlight. Jules, still recovering from his concussion and the shock of his near-death experience, was too disoriented and trusting to question his longtime confidant. But bubbles, no matter how carefully constructed, have a way of bursting. A loyal sound technician, Rick, who had been with Jules since his garage band days, grew increasingly disturbed by the escalating venom directed at Maya. Rick, present at the concert, had seen Maya's selfless act firsthand. He knew the truth. One afternoon, he slipped a tablet into Jules's hospital room, a silent act of rebellion. "Jules, you need to see this," Rick said, his voice low and urgent. "Evelyn's been keeping you in the dark." Jules, distracted and irritable, took the tablet. Rick had opened a meticulously compiled dossier, screenshots of Crystal Thorne's manipulative interview, a collection of the most vicious tabloid headlines, and a stream of hateful comments from Maya's social media. He also included a copy of the cease and desist letter sent to Maya, something Jules had never authorized or even known about. As Jules scrolled, his pale face drained even further. His eyes, fixed on the screen, widened in horror, and then narrowed with a terrible growing fury. "What? What is this?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "This isn't what she told me. She said Maya was just confused, overwhelmed. Evelyn's making her out to be a villain, Jules," Rick explained, his voice grim. "She's trying to force her to refuse the money. She's terrified of losing control of your assets, of you." The truth hit Jules with the force of a physical blow. He had intended a grand gesture of gratitude, an act of redemption. Instead, he had unwittingly unleashed a monstrous campaign of destruction on the woman who had saved his life. The guilt was suffocating. His anger, slow-burning and intense, turned from the media to Evelyn Reed. He had been manipulated, isolated, and used as a pawn in a cruel game. He pushed himself out of bed, ignoring Rick's protests. "Get me out of here. I need to see her." Bypassing Evelyn's tightly controlled security, Jules had Rick drive him directly to Maya's apartment. He arrived in a nondescript black SUV, a stark contrast to the usual paparazzi circus. He knocked tentatively, not wanting to scare her. Maya, still seething from her conversation with Evelyn, cautiously peered through her peephole. Her breath hitched when she saw him. Julian Vance, the rock star, standing on her shabby doorstep. She opened the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and hardened resolve. She wasn't intimidated anymore. "Maya," he said, his voice laced with genuine remorse. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. Evelyn. She kept all of this from me." He gestured vaguely at the world outside. Maya didn't invite him in immediately. She crossed her arms, the sling a visible testament to her sacrifice. "No idea? Your manager has been systematically destroying my life, telling me you're impressionable and need to be protected from people like me. You had no idea that your public announcement has made me a target, cost me my job, my education, and almost my sanity?" Her voice was level, but sharp, cutting through his celebrity aura. Jules flinched. He looked genuinely distraught. "I swear, Maya. I thought it was just gratitude. A simple thank you. Evelyn said she was managing the optics. I never, ever meant for this to happen." He looked around her small, sparse apartment, taking in the evidence of her struggles, so different from the pampered existence he inhabited. "Well, it happened," Maya said, finally stepping aside and allowing him to enter. "Come in. I have a lot to tell you." For the first time, they spoke not as a rock star and a fan, but as two people caught in the same storm, one by design, the other by cruel consequence. Maya, no longer afraid, laid out every threat, every insult, every bureaucratic hurdle she had endured. The dean's contempt, the doctor's dismissal, the legal threats, the public vilification. Jules listened intently, his face growing darker with each revelation. The guilt morphed into a fierce protectiveness. He saw the genuine, good person beneath the public's distorted image, and his anger at Evelyn, at Crystal, at the entire cynical machine that had done this, grew into a resolve to fight back. "This stops now," Jules declared, his voice regaining some of its famous power. "You won't refuse the money, Maya. You saved my life. You deserve every penny, and we're going to make sure the world knows the truth." They forged an unlikely alliance. Jules, with his immense resources, wasted no time. He immediately fired Evelyn Reed, a public spectacle that sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. He hired a bulldog of a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sandra Diaz, for Maya, a lawyer who specialized in media defamation and civil rights. They began to gather evidence. Sandra secured a sworn affidavit from the senior paramedic who had backed Maya up on stage, unequivocally stating that Maya's quick assessment had likely prevented further injury to Jules. They pulled security footage from the stadium, showing Maya in a cheap seat, not lurking backstage, disproving the stalker theory. Jules, using his own intel, uncovered suspicious financial transactions between Evelyn and Crystal, payments designed to fuel the smear campaign. "We can't just play defense, Maya," Jules said, his eyes alight with a newfound purpose. "We need to go on the offensive. We need a platform where no one can edit, no one can twist our words. We go live. We tell the whole story." Their plan was audacious. An appearance on the National Spotlight, the country's most watched primetime news interview show. It was a risky move, but also their best chance to reclaim the narrative, to expose the truth, and to finally give Maya Rodriguez the justice and recognition she deserved. The date was set, the stage prepared for a final, public reckoning. Maya, looking at Jules, saw not just a famous musician, but a man who finally understood, who finally believed her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The set of The National Spotlight was a familiar sight from Maya's days of late-night study breaks: polished wood, soft lighting, and the stern, intelligent face of veteran journalist David Sterling. Tonight, however, the glare of the studio lights felt less like illumination and more like an interrogation. Maya sat beside Julian Vance, her heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She was wearing a simple, tailored dress, chosen to project professionalism and sincerity. Jules, dressed in a sharp suit, looked determined, his usual rock star swagger replaced by a quiet intensity. David Sterling began, his voice smooth and probing. "Mr. Vance, Miss Rodriguez, thank you for joining us. This has been quite the saga, Miss Rodriguez. The public narrative around you has been tumultuous. Many accuse you of opportunism, of leveraging a moment of heroism for immense personal gain. What do you say to those accusations?" Maya's lawyer, Sandra Diaz, had drilled her for this moment. She took a deep breath. "I say," Maya began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "that I ran towards danger, not away from it. I say that for weeks, I have faced character assassination for simply trying to save a life. My reward for selflessness, it seems, was to be torn apart by those who profit from cynicism." David Sterling pivoted to Jules. "Mr. Vance, why choose Miss Rodriguez as the sole beneficiary of your entire world tour? This is an unprecedented sum. Are you absolutely certain you weren't influenced in a vulnerable state?" Jules leaned forward, his eyes locking with Sterling's. "I was influenced, David," he stated calmly. "I was influenced by a young woman who, without hesitation, put her own body between me and crushing death. I was influenced by pure, unadulterated heroism. And frankly, the idea that a life saved is only worth a token, thank you, while cynicism and greed are rewarded, is precisely what's wrong with the world." He then delivered the first devastating blow to the smear campaign. "And since we're talking about influence," Jules continued, his voice hardening, "let's talk about the real influence at play here." He signaled to a technician. "We have some audio we'd like to play, Mr. Sterling. This is a recent phone call between my former manager, Evelyn Reed, and a journalist." The studio went silent as Evelyn Reed's voice, crisp and undeniable, filled the air. "Yes, paint her as an opportunist, a broke student, desperate for money. Plant the idea that she knew about the stage, that she was trying to get his attention. It doesn't matter if it's true, It only matters if people believe it. We need to protect Julian's assets and my control. This girl is a liability. A collective gasp could almost be felt through the television screen. David Sterling's composure wavered, his eyes wide. Jules pressed on. And here are some text messages, also authenticated, between Evelyn Reed and Crystal Thorne, discussing payments for Miss Thorne to leak stories implying a romantic manipulation. Images of the damning texts flashed across the screen. The tide had turned. The public, watching live, was witnessing the calculated malice behind the narrative they had consumed. Then, David Sterling turned to Maya again, his voice now imbued with genuine respect. Miss Rodriguez, you faced threats of expulsion from your university, accusations of practicing medicine without a license, and even a doctor implying you were faking your injuries. How did you endure that? This was Maya's moment. She didn't speak about the money or the fame. She spoke with a quiet, burning passion about her profession. When you enter nursing, you take an oath to care, to protect, to save lives. There is a protocol for saving a life that supersedes any bureaucratic protocol about liability. I saw a man in danger. I used the skills I was trained for. I assessed his C-spine. I made sure he wasn't moved incorrectly, which could have paralyzed him. That is not practicing medicine without a license. That is the fundamental duty of a healthcare professional. Her intelligence, her unwavering ethics, her raw passion for her chosen path shone through, undeniable. She explained the medical science, the split-second decisions, the ethical imperative that drove her actions. She articulated the impossible position she was put in by a system that valued reputation and liability above actual human care. She didn't sound like a victim. She sounded like a fiercely principled advocate. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media, once a weapon against her, erupted in a wave of support. The public outcry for justice was immense. The fallout was swift and decisive. Within hours, Evelyn Reed was publicly fired by Jules's record label, her career in tatters. Crystal Thorne's carefully constructed influencer empire imploded under the weight of her deceit. And the next morning, Dean Albright, facing an unprecedented backlash and a barrage of calls from alumni and donors, issued a public apology. He announced Maya Rodriguez's immediate reinstatement to the nursing program, along with a full 4-year scholarship. Months later, the Second Chance World Tour was a monumental success. Maya, no longer a victim, stood beside Jules at a press conference, not as a beneficiary, but as a co-founder and managing partner of the newly established Vance Rodriguez Foundation. The foundation, funded by the tour's profits, was dedicated to providing scholarships for aspiring nursing students and, crucially, offering legal aid and advocacy for healthcare workers who faced retaliation or bureaucratic obstacles for upholding ethical standards and saving lives. She looked out at the throng of reporters, her gaze steady and confident. She had faced down the cynicism, the greed, the relentless attacks. She had found her voice, not because of the immense fortune, but because she had been forced to fight for her own integrity. She had saved a rock star, but in doing so, she had also saved herself, forging a new future, not just for herself, but for countless others. Her journey, born of a moment of selfless instinct, had become a testament to resilience, integrity, and the powerful, enduring impact of true heroism.